welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Welch from Tarleton State University, PD in Stephenville, Texas. He has 42 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Welch. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm really looking forward to it. 42 years, but kind of like 44 years. There's 2 years that maybe don't count. But I was hoping that you could maybe give us a little bit of background. Who are you?
Okay.
How did you get started in this career 42
Okay.
or 44 years ago? And what
Okay.
does it look like so far?
Okay. Well, it's funny. I wanted to be a veterinarian or a commercial airline pilot, and I didn't have the math skills for it. And so,
Mm,
like, what can I go into that doesn't require a lot of math and it would interest me? And then in law enforcement popped up, and so I thought, oh, that might be something I want to go into. And my parents had moved to Durango, Colorado, and I loved it up there. And it was interesting. It's hard to get into police work up there because there's a lot of out-of-state people moving in from California, primarily, some from Texas, and with experience. And so, how do you get into a job when you're not experienced? And so, I went to work for a railroad there to start with, and as security. But we were deputized by the local sheriff's office, and I also was a reserve part-time for the sheriff's office. And so that's my quasi, you know, sort of police work start. And I really enjoyed it. And then I got the opportunity to go to the sheriff's office there full time. And I mean, it's what idyllic place to live. It was, Durango, Colorado. It's this mountains, skiing, hunting, rafting, hiking, all the cool outdoor stuff. And 1,800 square miles. And just like you think about, and we had four-wheel drive patrol cars to go up on the mountain roads with and things like that. And I did it for 3 years, and I really enjoyed it. I worked at the jail and patrol, and I made detective before I left. And one of my best friends was from Texas, like me, and he went to work for the Fort Worth Police Department. His brother was a felony prosecutor in the DA's office, and thought that that was the best department in Tarrant County, which Fort Worth is the primary largest city in. And so he went to work there, and I went to go visit him about a year later, and rode in with him. And we were in the stockyards, the famous stockyards area of Fort Worth, and it was a great exciting Saturday night to work, and it was topping calls. And Fort Worth was the first major city in the country to put computers in the cars. And so I thought, wow, technology, I loved it. And so I mean, I got on. We had a large hiring push back in the 80s, and so I started there in '86, and it in the early '90s, Fort Worth infamously had the second highest crime rate in the country for a while. So we had a big problem on our hands. But I loved working in Fort Worth, and I worked there 28 years and
mm,
retired, and worked lots of cool different jobs there. I mean, obviously, I did this patrol. I did a lot of community policing, which I really enjoyed. Detective, auto theft detective for a while. That was good for several years, and get to crawl in and around cars and get dirty, and go to chop shops and get stolen cars back was a lot of fun. And then I totally switched gears and I went to adult sex crimes. And that was a very difficult
mm,
um, job. It's very meaningful, but it was also very difficult from the just mentally, because a car is an inanimate object. I could forget about it and go home at the end of the night. A person's it's different. And when someone's been violated in that horrible way, you want to see it through to resolution. I know I was fortunate enough to be on several task force on serial rapists, and even work with other cities, and to successfully catch them. And that was extremely rewarding to see a true predator, taken down. And then I went on to supervisory roles, and I did a couple different roles as supervisor. And my last one was in a large department. A lot of departments are broken up. Everybody's heard of internal affairs, and that's the kind of the more administrative side. Someone was rude to me, someone broke a policy, and then there's the criminal side. And my side of the house, I was in charge of all the criminal investigations on police officers, and I answered directly to the chief. It's kind of really unusual. I get to bypass all the other chain of command and go straight to the chief on there. And also our secondary job was we were his bodyguards, because in a big city you have to have bodyguards for the chief of police, because they go into some crowds sometimes that aren't really super happy with you. And but we looked at it as, how many officers can we clear? We were proud of the funds that we could exonerate from bogus, claims against them. And sometimes they're mad because they were actually working really hard, in trying to clean up crime. And so they try to take it out by doing false claims that they were, on the take, or whatnot. And so that was, to me, rewarding to look at it from that viewpoint. It wasn't a gotcha mentality for us. It was, who can we, all the wins we could get by exonerating officers from false claims. And then I worked there 28 years, and I planned to retire at Fort Worth. And I got a phone call from a colleague I used to work with here in Stephenville at Tarleton. And I was going there part time working my master's, by the way. So I already had some familiarity with Tarleton. And they said, the chief's job's come open. I think he'd be a good fit. You ought to put in for it. And so myself and 120 other people put in for it. And I was very fortunate to get the job. And I've been here for 11 years, and really enjoyed, going from a small rural department to a major city department to a college environment. It's three very distinct type of policing environments. And so I've really enjoyed getting to do all three different types, because they're different. They really are.
Yeah.
On the college side, you have to deal with normal laws and everything, and then you have to be able to deal with the Department of Education and follow the clery, requirements. And if you get one statistic wrong, it's about a $75,000, fine for each one that's wrong.
Mm.
So, but that's the professional side. So personal side, I've been happily married for 33 years to my
Wow.
best friend in the world, Cindy, and she's a licensed clinical social worker, therapist in private practice. So she's a shrink, and she's my personal shrink, not officially, but it's great. It keeps me grounded. It really does. And we got three great kids, got a granddaughter, and we like to travel. We travel a lot. We cruise a lot, and she's already got cruises booked for us up into 2027. This Tahiti, I think, is going to be great. And then we she loves football, as do I, and she likes sci-fi like me, and we both like big dogs. We have three big Great Danes. They're all rescues, and they're a lot of fun. I mean, they're a lot of work, but they're a lot of fun. You got 400 pounds of dogs. Take them for a walk. It's a lot to handle. And we started collecting art about 5 years ago. We really enjoy that. It's really a whole interesting perspective, and it's making us use a different side of our brain, than we normally would. And so we're really happy. So anyway, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for sharing a personal piece. I really enjoyed that. I think that so often, and I'm guilty of this too, when people ask, tell us about yourself, it's all career,
Right,
and
right.
you might be one of, if not the first person who has had the opportunity, not the opportunity, but who has taken the opportunity to share about their personal lives in
Oh,
that
really?
way in the
Wow.
intro. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. And I loved how you lit up when you talked about that, and talked
Uh,
about your wife and your kids and the things that you like to do. I really appreciate that. And I think you and I could talk offline about art for a while, because there's a few artists that like I really like, and one day I want to collect art too. So we can talk offline about that.
okay. All right.
But thank you for sharing about your personal life. And I did want to ask you, kind of on the professional side of things, you've been in
Hmm.
this career a really long time. Throughout the entirety of your career, what do you think you're most proud of?
Um, my ethics, not compromising.
Yeah.
What's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. Yeah, you'll have calls that are kind of gray, because it's not like textbook like you learn in the police academy, and you got to sort through it and use your critical thinking skills to work through it. But in the end of the day, if you look back and say, did I make the right call? And I'd say that's probably, that's what I've always tried to do the right thing. Be a Boy Scout or Girl Scout, in whatever case you might be, whatever sex you are, but that's what I would always try to do.
Yeah. We talked a little bit offline about, how can you, with all the pressure that happens throughout your life and your career,
Mhm.
keep that compass pointing north, and you have a lot of people who are kind of tugging and pulling in expectations in different ways.
Right.
How do you think you were able to do that? Was it just like that strong boundary of just understanding, within yourself what that north was?
Yeah, I think it's not any one single thing. I mean, obviously, I'm equally yoked with my wife, who's very much the same mindset.
Mm,
We're both Christians, and we believe, and that's what a great resource guidebook for your path. Um, and then I had great parents who taught me right from wrong. There was something that happened early on in my career that I did something that probably wasn't what I should have done. And I told them the story, and they go, "We didn't raise you to be that way."
mm,
I was overly harsh on someone when I shouldn't have been. It's early on in my career, and they pretty kind of sat me down and said, "We didn't raise you to be this way. You need to be, look out for the downtrodden. Look out for what does it say in the Bible? To watch after the orphans and widows." So
mm.
it's the same thing, same concept. And so I think it's very important that you do the right thing, and you bounce off things that were kind of, did I do the right thing? You talk to colleagues and or your spouse or whatnot, and get some affirmation or correction, if you need to be
Yeah.
to do better the next time.
I like that you said, or some correction. And I think it's so important to have people in your corner that are willing to tell you the truth if
Mhm.
you're, quote unquote, messing up, and I,
Right,
I
right,
value that so much to have people in my life, whether that be, family, friends who are
right.
going to sit you down and say, hey, like, that's not who you are, and
Right.
hey, like I don't know if that was the right move because I think sometimes we try to surround ourselves with people who are just going to be agreeable. And I think that
Yeah,
it's really important to have people who aren't always going to be that way, that are going to be honest with you and that are going to hold you at a higher standard.
correct. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it a lot too, like when I look at, you know, if I mess up or my employees does, was it a mistake of the mind or the heart? Huge difference to
Mm,
me. What was their intentionality on this?
mhm.
And if they just didn't, they're trying their best, they just made an honest mistake. That's easy. That's the kind of things you hope for.
Yeah.
Is somebody who does something, including myself, wrong with the wrong intent. That can be a character issue. So that's a big distinction for me.
Yeah, 100%. So on the personal side,
Mhm.
um, what do you think your biggest accomplishment or the thing that you're most proud of?
Wow. Well, I know in police work, we have one of the, if not the highest divorce rates of any profession.
Mhm.
So being, only married once in my life, and happily married. I mean, I'm happily married. Is to me is the biggest accomplishment. And then, of course, kids. I mean, we have three great kids, and they're doing well. And so we have a great relationship with them. So that's another big accomplishment. Because to me, when it's not going to say on my tombstone, I wish I'd worked more hours, or I wish I'd worked longer as a police officer or whatnot. It's going to, was I a good husband, father, etc. That to me is more the most important part, because everything else is secondary and peripheral.
Yeah, I had a conversation recently where there was another chief that was like, at my funeral, like, please don't just talk about the fact that I was a police officer the
Hmm.
whole time. He's like, I
Right,
like that was an important piece of my life and, something I'm proud of. He's like, but it
right,
was, in the same lines, like, I want to be remembered for the fact that I was kind, for my family, the things that I did
right.
outside of the career. And so
Hmm.
I think that, it really segues nicely into our conversation today about wellness and
Right,
making
right,
sure that you take care of yourself proactively and reactively so that you can have a successful life? It doesn't have to just be a successful career, although we do hope for that. But how
Right.
can you have a successful life outside of the career
Yeah.
and beyond the career? And when you and I talked offline, we kind of talked about three core pillars: physical, mental, and financial. And I really want to kind of dissect all three with you. From a mental perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen within the law enforcement profession?
I think it's taking things personally
Mhm.
sometimes. When lots of times when we encounter people, it's the worst day of their life and they're not holding it together. And so they're lashing out. And it's hard, it's really hard to not take it personal when they call you bunch of names or whatever they're doing. Now, sometimes they really cross the line and they're physical, and then there's absolutely consequences for that.
Sure.
But it's hard not to sometimes take things personally, and I have a hard time with that myself. As I get, you get heated and you don't want to react, but you have to train yourself to do your job in a fair manner, and then it's not for us to decide what happens. Then it's for the courts later on if need be. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me mentally is, and you have to be mentally, you can't be so absorbed in your job. Like you said, you're a person first, and then you have a career. It's separate, and you have to take time yourself and have other things you want to do in your life, and your identity can't be just that you're a police officer or whatever I mean, there's I know several professions that always rise to the top of the front page or the leading story. If you're, I call them the three Ps: preachers, politicians, and police officers.
Mm.
If they do something really bad, it's on the front page of the paper or the leading news. If it's a plumber, not so much, right? So it depends on what your profession is. On people tend to quarterback you a lot on what your decisions were, and they look at you. So that adds more mental pressure to your job, to always, because always potentially in the spotlight.
Yeah. I like that of not taking things personally, and I agree that it's easier said than done,
It
especially
is.
like when you're in the
Mhm.
heat of the moment. I almost envision like a duck. How can you let some of those things kind of slide off,
Yeah.
slide off your back a little bit instead of absorbing all of that,
Right.
and I would imagine, especially, if you're having multiple interactions throughout a day where people are at their worst
Right.
and maybe they are lashing out or using choice words, if you allow all of that to
Mhm.
absorb within you. Have you ever heard of the expression, your issues are in your tissues? Have you ever heard of this?
No, no, never.
So they talk about, like trauma and stress, and if you allow it to kind of seep into you, then it
uh
manifests in the physical body as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think it's this idea of how can we allow some of those things to kind of roll off, but then if those things do impact you, then what are those things that we can do to offload those things? What are
Yeah.
some of those resources? And you talked about, a perfect example of your wife. She's
hmm
a therapist.
hmm
Therapy is a
hmm
really good way to offload some of those things and to
Right.
talk about it. Um, how do you teach, because not taking things personally requires a lot of emotional intelligence to sit back and say, this person is at their worst. It's not about me, it's about the situation. I'm not going to take this personally, is having that emotional intelligence, but it's also emotional regulation to be
Right.
able to like stay level in that situation and kind of breathe through it and not react or respond to it in a negative way. How do you teach that?
Well, I think a lot of it comes with age and wisdom. It really does.
Mm.
And trial. I mean, I know here example here on university. The social media is the bane of my existence sometimes because the students will get upset and everybody's a keyboard warrior and they'll lash out somewhat out of their the maturity level for their age, and they'll say things in the heat of the moment. Like when I'm mad, I never send an email. I wait till the next day.
Mm,
I'll vent and write it down and I'll save it. And the next day I go, oh God, I'm not going to send that. I'm going to tone it down a little bit because you can always go lower, but start high and work low and always try that. And I mean, they teach us that when we're working, taught in the police academies, it's reinforced. You really start off high with people and you can, to try to, and talk softer and it
mm,
calms them down. When they're yelling, you talk softer. Sometimes it helps because yelling right back is not going to work. And so it's just really important to I mean, it's discipline. Okay, so if you work out, I like to work out, and I know if I skip the gym for a week, I've lost something. So if you practice something, shooting, whatever your skill is, you got to practice it to keep it. So you've
mm,
got to, every call you make is an opportunity to do well, or not do well. And you can always critique yourself. I learned really, really early on in my career. I don't know if we mentioned this when we talked earlier before or not. The average person only has a handful of significant events with police, in their lifetime. And I'm not talking about going into the local diner and waving, I mean, actually something's happened. Their car got in a wreck, you got in a wreck, or somebody burglarized your home or whatnot. And just a handful of incidents. And based on those incidents, they formulate a perception or idea about police. I mean, I remember we had a Black Lives Matter a silent protest on campus, and we were dealing with the organizer, and she goes, "We love y'all, the police here on campus. It's just some police back when we're from, so we're upset about. They're from major cities, and
mm,
so." But I learned early on, in my first job in police work, I took a routine burglary report. And it was an old man, and he's a widower, and he asked me, "Would you come in and have some coffee?" And I said, "Sure." So I came in, I was drinking coffee with him, and I looked at it at his garden, and I said, "Man, you've got a really nice garden." That's all I said to him. And he goes, "Well, thank you, I appreciate it. I work hard in it." And so I take the report, go back to work, routine, no big deal to me. And then about a week or two later, I get a call from dispatch. He asked me to come back out to his house, and I thought, "Oh, great, got the serial number to his missing TV or whatever it was he had stolen." And I show up, and he had 4 quarts of raspberries from his garden. And I said, "What is this? What's that for?" And he says, "For taking the time to be kind to an old man." And I thought, "Oh my gosh," it was routine, for me, but for him, it was like it was meaningful. So I thought, oh my God. So every time you deal with someone, it's a touch point.
yeah,
And you get opportunity to do good or not do good and listen and be empathetic. And so that was something I didn't learn that from my wife. I learned that through work, and so I've tried to always remember that of every contact I make here, and not be phony, but just be, I tell a lot of dad jokes around here. I mean, the student workers here are like, "Oh God, you sound like my dad, or my uncle or whatnot, and that's okay. It's a way to get to know people.
yeah.
So it's okay to be normal and human and empathetic. So,
I love that story. And my hope, because I agree with you, I think that some of the best lessons I've learned throughout my life have been through my experiences with things. And I don't know if I would completely grasp and understand some of the lessons if I hadn't experienced it and walked through,
hmm
because I think sometimes when you hear it from other people, it doesn't land in the same way as, you actually experiencing it yourself. However, my hope is that through these conversations, it's a reminder to anyone who's listening that whether it's in your professional or your personal life, you have the ability to inspire someone, you have the ability to make someone smile, to make someone feel better, and we forget that
hmm
sometimes. And it could be something so small. I was actually in Texas recently, and there are not very many places that I would live. I look around the country and I think about like cold weather. I'm from Arizona, so we're
right,
built a little bit different.
right.
But my cousin lives in the Fort Worth area, and I was driving around, and it was so cute, and people were waving and smiling as I was driving through the neighborhoods. And that like made me feel really good, and it's something
Mm.
so simple that I forget that, sometimes we go day to day and we don't even look people in the eye. We don't even smile
Mhm.
at them or say hi. And sometimes that's all you need to just feel better is to just smile at someone, shake
Yeah,
someone's hand,
yeah,
hold the door for someone. And so hopefully, this is a reminder to everybody that we all have the ability to do that if we maybe slow down a little bit. We're intentional with the
right.
interactions that we have with people.
The it's funny. I serve on a board for a nonprofit here in town for victims of violent crime, and the one of the board members is a city council member, and she told me a interesting story. I didn't think anything of it. It was the day after Charlie Kirk got assassinated, and there was a little vigil here on campus, and out and little scooters zipping through there and things like that. And there's a guy walking up and it's with his son with their two dogs. And he's funny, his first thought was, oh gosh, I did something wrong. I can't be here or whatnot. And then he told his wife story. And then the officer got down and started playing with the dogs. And she goes, oh, it's probably Matt. And she asked, was that you? I said, yeah, that was me. So I mean, it was okay. I didn't mind them being there with their dogs. They weren't being unruly. And I just wanted to play with the dogs for a minute. And but it humanizes you. You do that kind of stuff. And I like dogs too. So it was just a two for one, right? But it just shows you how people assume when I call or show we call us, it's going to be bad news. And I've our marketing communications director, the current one, the previous one, just occasionally I'll just call them to say hi, and they first thing I call them, they go, what's wrong? They think it's something bad happened. And I go, no, just call to say hi. And I laugh and hang up on them. They just think like, oh gosh. But that's because to reinforce that it's not always bad news. It can be
Yeah.
good news. So
Yeah.
don't assume that we're always calling with bad news. So,
I like that. I like this idea of, positive reinforcement and,
mhm.
showing up in the good times and the bad times, and
Right.
it's so funny because a story popped in my head when you said that because my stepdad's my best friend. He raised me as a single dad. And I call him probably every day. Like I'm
Wow.
always the one that calls him. We talk all the time. He's my best friend. And I mentioned to him one time, I was like, you never call me. I always call you. And he's like, yeah, like he's like, you call me when you're like on your way home for something or whatever, and I'm like,
Mhm.
and then he started calling me, and it was like at first I was like, what's wrong? Who died? As soon as he called me, and he's like, no, I'm just
Yeah.
calling to say hi. And so I think, sometimes it's that adjustment period if we're so used to only
Right.
hearing from people in certain situations, and we can kind of change that, as we start to put in the effort in the
Yeah.
positive space
Yeah.
too. But I had that same situation where every time he called me, because when he would call me, it was always bad. It was always, you know, a death in the family or whatever, because I was always the one that called him. And so I really like that concept of like, hey, like, how can we show up in the good times and the bad times? And how can we
Mm.
just take the time to say hi and I'm thinking about you and, how's your day? And I think
Uh,
that that makes a world of difference.
the you mentioned a while ago that because I worked at Fort Worth, you liked Fort Worth when you were there, and my wife was, although she's born in Georgia, she's primarily raised up in the Connecticut area because her dad had to move. And I said, we walking the neighborhood, same thing. Everybody waves, smiles, and I
Mhm.
said, "Do you get that in Connecticut?" She goes, "Oh no, no, it's
Mhm.
very different up there. I mean, they know you, they will smile and wave, but if they don't know you, they don't do it. It's very, very different, very more stoic, kind of a culture up there." And wow, what a difference! I was always being born and raised in Texas, it's very normal to me, and it's
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
You don't do that other places.
I
So
might have to move to Texas, to be honest. It was a really nice experience.
good.
They had left like all the neighborhoods had bikes just like out in the yard for the entire
Yeah,
time I was there. Like they're not worried about people stealing it. If I left a bike outside my house, it would be gone in a couple hours.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
I live in Phoenix, but it would definitely not be there anymore. But
yeah.
it was a positive experience. I do want to talk a little bit about physical wellness because
Right.
you had a really interesting comparison. You compared the human body to a jet airliner, and I was hoping that you could
Yes.
explain what you meant by that.
I had a doctor once explain to me, we talked about in our profession how when you get a hot call, your body ramps up and you get an adrenaline dump and your blood pressure goes up and you get ready for that call. And especially like when I worked in Fort Worth, when you work sometimes 15, 18, 20 calls a day, it's happening over and over and over again, depending on the type of call you have. And it takes its toll on you. And they said the comparison was when an airliner takes off, they have to pressurize. And the long haul jets that go to fly to Tokyo and places like that, they don't pressurize. They go up, they go all the way across the ocean, they go down. They pressurize once and depressurize once. But the short haul jets, they're hopping from Fort Worth to Austin or San Antonio and short haul planes. They go up, they pressurize, they come down, do it all day long. And so the metal fatigue in the planes over time, they have a shorter lifespan than the larger planes who don't do it as often.
Mm.
And so they said the comparison was to your body, how your body ramps up. And that's why police officers have the one of the highest rates of early onset heart attack and one of the shortest lifespans of any profession. And because all that stress, it happens in your body. And it's interesting. The one of the things my wife taught me was we have our youngest child's adopted, and he came from CPS and Child Protective Services, and we were we knew a lot of the things would happen ahead of time, and a lot of it was based to something I've ever heard of called it's called the ACEs scoring,
Yeah.
it's adverse childhood experiences,
Mhm.
and it's like a short 10 question test, and we took it for both our other kids and then our adopted child, and where our other two kids had score zero, they had nothing in their past. Our oldest child had about six of the 10. And so, were you ever physically abused? Were you starved as a child? Were you sexually abused? What are the different categories? And the reason it came up was Kaiser Permanente, an insurance company based in the California area, noticed certain patterns, and it was typically certain that the lifespan and well as the medical issues for these kids was way higher than in other kids who didn't have these things. And
Mm.
so if you kind of extrapolate that with the shift work the police work do and the high stress calls and the way you eat, you're on the run. So you got to run through the drive through somewhere. And so I mean, I remember one time somebody griping to our captain at work, says, "We're not getting time to go eat." And he goes, "By gosh, that's why God invented 7-Elevens and drive-throughs. You better go do that if you want to eat." Like, okay. And
Yeah.
so, that takes its toll on your body. It really does. And so I think physically you have to um, take time to decompress. You have to go hit the gym. I mean, go whatever your thing is, cycling, weight, yoga. My wife talked me into trying a hot infrared yoga, a couple of years ago. And I said, I turned my man card in for this. But I did it and it works and it really helps, especially if you get a little bit of arthritis anywhere, it really helps a lot and to
Yeah.
stretch out and whatnot. So it's a good addition to your workout. So it was just, it's funny. I wish I knew now what I back when I was 20 years old and like, wow, I'd have done some things different, as far as
Yeah.
physically and mentally.
100%. I really like that comparison to the jet airliner. I've never heard that before, but it makes complete sense. And I really appreciate that you followed that with some of the solutions,
Right.
because in my head, I'm like, okay, we have this extremely challenging career. And the things that you were talking about, the types of calls you get, day over day.
Mhm.
you can't control that, right? That's a
No.
part of
Mm-mm.
your career. You can't control how many calls you get in a day, what types of calls, the type of people that you're going to encounter throughout that day, throughout that week, throughout that month, throughout the entirety of your career. And so, how can you control the controllable? How can we offset some of the things that we know are going to happen? You know
Right.
that in your particular line of work, that these things are going to happen. And so, knowing that, what are the things that can counter that? And so you mentioned a few of those things, and I appreciated that because I think sometimes we get so into, well, this is the problem, this is the challenge, but then there's no follow up to that. There's no,
Right.
okay, well, we understand the challenge, but what is the solution? And I'm a really big fan of solution based conversations because there's no growth and there's no improvement if we don't have some sort of solution. And so,
Right.
this idea of how can you physically start to take care of yourself outside of your career. And, maybe that is working out in the gym. Maybe that is yoga. Maybe that is, walking, running, hiking, whatever that looks like for
Right.
you. And that is going to look different for everybody. But how can we have some sort of physical component? And then we also talked about some of the mental side of things too. How can we practice emotional regulation, nervous system
Right.
regulation,
Right.
which is going to help to offload some of those things too. Breathing techniques, mindfulness, meditation, grounding, talk to a therapist, talk to anybody,
Right.
anyone who you can, offload some of those things with so that you can start to counter what you just explained of like that, constant um, pressure,
Right. I
pressurizing.
mean, I know we've done a couple of things here that help counter some of those things. Like every officer here has gone through an extra. It's a decently extensive training to be a certified mental health peace officer to help us with the students. But what do you get is also it's another trade-off for that, or a good thing is you learn more about yourself because you're learning about mental health at the same time. And I know for physical health, a lot of people, oh, I want to start working out. Well, maybe you got to see where you are first.
Mm,
So you start off, you can't climb Mount Everest, starting off, you got to work up to it. And we had a company come in that specializes in first responders, physical health in a full workup, more than your standard doctor's physical.
yeah.
And we had two officers that had a significant major cardiac issue, they had no knowledge of. And so that might have saved two people's lives right off the bat. So it was so worth it for me. So it started as a good baseline of where to build from.
Yeah.
And and then we worked out a deal with our rec sports here on campus. And we helped them out with some of their 5Ks for free. In exchange, all the officers get a free gym membership and a trainer if they want it. And so I go see this great big huge muscled up guy twice a week, and he puts me through my paces, and he's doing a good job. I like it. It's good having somebody who's more nuanced in it to show you the right form so you don't hurt yourself and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that self-assessment is so important, and it's harder to look at ourselves than it is to look at other people.
Right.
I know it's such a cheesy thing to say, but I was actually thinking about this morning because I also work out with a personal trainer 2 times a week. I'm in the gym at like 5 a.m.
Mhm.
And afterwards I was driving home and I was thinking about this. That old adage of like when you point your finger at someone, there's, three more fingers. I think they say four, but when I point, it's three,
Yeah.
pointing back at you. And it's so much easier to look outward. It's so much
Yes.
easier to see the fault, and I'll put that in quotes, of other people.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a friend or a family member, and you're like, man, like, you put on weight, or you're not exercising, or you're not doing these things. But it's harder to look at ourselves and be honest with ourselves of where we are now and where that room for improvement really is. And I really believe that without awareness, there's no jumping off point, So, like you said, how can you have that baseline? How can you have some sort of awareness of where you are? And then you can start laying the foundation and taking those steps forward to where you want to go. But without knowing where you are, how do you know
Right.
how to get to where you want to go. And so I appreciate you doing that. And I know that that particular and I think I know the company that you're talking about, but that kind of workup is something that's been really popular within the law enforcement profession. And I do think it's saving lives. I do
Yeah.
think that there are a lot of people, from what I understand, that are getting those similar results of, maybe now knowing that they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, cardiac issues. Locally, we had kind of a demo that I heard of, and we had some fire and some law enforcement, and there was certain cancers that were found through these screenings. And so,
Wow. Yeah.
how can you, and it's scary. I think that sometimes we don't want to know. And I think that's what
Right.
delays, that type of workup because people were maybe scared of finding something. But
Oh, yeah, yeah, let's would ignore it, like high
yeah,
blood pressure is a silent killer, and well,
yeah,
the only officer that's ever died in line of duty here at Tarleton, it was a heart attack, and he was in a fight with a student, and he had a heart attack, and so
wow,
that's and that well before my time, it's back in '78 when it happened, but
yeah.
still, it just it reemphasized every time they walk by this picture in the lobby, it's going to emphasize to them, this is it can happen, and it doesn't have to be a gunshot
Yeah.
or a high speed chase or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of awareness right now around cardiovascular health
Mhm.
and um, stress is really hard on your heart.
Hmm.
Nutrition plays a role. You talked about that before.
Right,
I also saw a stat, and I've shared this so many times, but it's the one stat that because I sit I sit, I wouldn't say the majority of the day, but I sit a lot behind my
right.
computer. And they said that sedentary lifestyle. So imagine, like, what do you do throughout the day, regardless of what your role is within the organization or within your career? You're maybe behind the desk, you're in your patrol car. When you go home, you're driving home or to and from work. When you get home, you sit, maybe have dinner, and then you
Hmm.
sit on the couch, and you watch a movie or whatever that is. But they said sedentary lifestyle, I think they said 8 hours a day
Hmm.
increases your risk of cardiovascular disease and cardiac arrest by like 140%. It was
Really?
something like
Wow.
really high. So how, again, when we have this awareness and you might not be able to control some of those things. If you're on patrol and you're working a 12-hour
Right,
shift and 8 of those hours are in the car or maybe in the briefing room or whatever that looks like for you, maybe you can't control that piece of it, but how can we counter that piece of
right.
it?
Well, no,
And
like
so,
like here I like them to get out of the cars and walk the buildings,
yeah,
walk the residence halls, things like that. I mean,
yeah,
I know here when I sit at my desk, I feel like I'm stuck here all day long. I can raise it up, a little button over here I can press and it'll raise it. It's a standing desk. At least I'm standing then. It's better than just sitting
yeah,
because sometimes about 2 in the afternoons when I hit a wall, sometimes like, oh gosh, I need to walk around, drink some coffee, stand up, do something because you just get tired. And
yeah.
so you get tired of getting paper cuts, right? So,
Well, and the other thing too, and I don't think a lot of people like think about this in this way, but from a physical health, like an injury prevention perspective,
mhm.
when we sit for long periods of time, it weakens our core. You start to see that bad posture, right? And so that's where a lot of back pain starts to come into play. It also makes your hips really tight, your hamstrings are really tight from sitting all day. Depending on what your posture is, your shoulders are really tight, and then you're, adding all of the other things like the
Yeah,
weight of your gear and everything else to it. So countering it by doing some sort of standing, walking mobility is going to
right.
be really good.
Yeah. But wearing a uniform, it bothers me now because in '94, I got hit by a drunk driver on duty.
Mm,
And the bulletproof vest I was wearing kept my back spine nice and flat. So, but yet the right above and below flexed really big. So I have two bulging discs because of the way the bulletproof vest it was on my back. And so if I wear a vest in a uniform all day, I can feel it. It starts to
yeah.
bother me just because of that. I think a long time ago, just you have to be. But it's interesting. One doctor said, "Oh, I want you to. Oh, you want to cut right away." And the next doctor goes, if you exercise, do what you're supposed to do, maintain your weight because weight's
Mm,
a huge thing. It says, I think you'll be fine. So when you come back to me crawl on your hands and knees, I'll operate. And I like that doctor.
yeah.
And so that's the one I stuck with, and I've never had to operated on for that. So that's good.
Love it. The last little pillar that we talked about was
Yes.
financial wellness. And
Yeah.
you made a comment to me. You said that this was something that you really wish you would have known when you were younger, that someone would have talked to you as a newer
Yes.
officer about financial wellness. What is maybe one thing that you wish you would have known about financial wellness that really would have helped you and would help any younger officers coming into this career?
Well, it plays into your mental and physical health. So think about it. There's endless opportunities for overtime in this profession. Either whether you're working for a university, at a football game, or you're overtime at work, because of short staffing. And so with that comes what's it going to do to you? It's more mental stress and more physical. You're in that uniform more, standing, sitting, whatever it is. And so it hurts you long run. So you got to really financially, if you can plan well and really have a budget and sit down and budget out a realistic lifestyle. I see a lot of young officers, as soon as they get that first big paycheck, they go buy a big truck or they buy a boat or buy whatever they buy. And so, and then the second thing is knowing a lot of law enforcement agencies you can retire at an earlier age, but are you ready to retire financially?
Mm,
So I remember I've been working at Fort Worth about 6 years, and I heard a couple of officers talk about deferred compensation. I go, what's that? They go, oh, we have a plan here. It comes, you can put it in this thing, it grows, you can manage it, and it doesn't count against your taxes and blah, blah, blah. And like, and no one talked about that to us in the police academy. And I was totally clueless. And I think people are a little more savvy nowadays about it. And I think most HRs do a better job of emphasizing it. But if you plan for that and you live within your means, then you don't have to work unless you want to work
yeah.
uh, later on in life. But you can still plan. Like my wife and I, we like I mentioned when I take vacations. So what do we cut back on? So we don't eat out very much. We like to cook at home, and we eat out maybe once every month or two. We eat healthy a lot,
Mhm.
food prep a lot, just two of us most of the time. So we'll have a bunch of stuff in the freezer. So she works and I do. And but it just you can there's always a trade-off. And that I know a lot of people that hit that $6 Starbucks every morning, on the way into work. And well, you make it yourself at the office, and save that money. It's just there's ways to cut back. You don't have to do certain things. And I think back to my childhood and you know, eating out for us was it was a treat, not like like you have to do it. But I understand they didn't have sports like there was now. When my two older kids were in sports, we were going from juggling volleyball and baseball and all the different sports they were doing. You sometimes you have to eat out a lot, or
Yeah.
pack stuff to take with you. But it's financial health is important too. From you should have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck, or you have to work overtime to pay for that new toy you bought. You should be able to get by just on what you make, and then be patient and save and for what you need in the future.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm like, if you want to go to Tahiti and have cruises,
Yeah,
booked through 2027, then
yeah,
listen up, folks.
yeah.
Here's how you do it.
Yep.
But
Yeah. Now I'm
um,
working lower than a lot of police officers do, but working in universities is a wholly different kind of stress level and different kind of, and so it's kind of like starting over again. But I mean, I was assigned to TCU for 6 years when I was at Fort Worth, and I enjoyed the college environment. It's very different.
mm,
And so when I had the chance to do something full time like that, I thought, oh, I'm gonna take it. And it's good.
yeah,
It's very different. And we've had a lot of officers here that are retired from somewhere else and they're retired of the grind. They grind in a big city. And we've had a lot of officers from Fort Worth, Arlington, Austin, Houston area. So there's, big city experience come here and they know what to do in an emergency, but it rarely happens here. But it's at least I know they can draw upon that background, but they wanted something a little different and where they could actually talk to people and have a good relationships with. And the officers here, we only hire people that are friendly, outgoing, and want to be around a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds, they're a lot of fun, I mean,
Yeah.
they just job security too, but
Yeah.
but it's they're a lot of fun too.
Yeah, it keeps you young.
It is.
One of the things like it really hits hard for me too, and we kind of talked about this before about like sometimes it's age and maturity and it's
Right.
experience within your life. And when I was younger, like I had no idea how to manage finances. I had no idea what to do. And it took, a lot of learning, kind of like trial by fire a little bit of like how do you budget. One of the things that I really recommend, and maybe it's not for everybody, but it's helped me, is hooking up your bank accounts to a QuickBooks and understanding where your money is going. So, to your
Mhm.
point, some people don't realize when you're spending like $6 here and there, like with Starbucks, you don't realize like in a month, maybe you spent $400
Yeah.
on Starbucks and you're like, whoa, I could buy myself a coffee machine at home for, even if you spent $400 or $500 on a nice one, it would pay itself off within a month, right? And then you're saving
Right.
that month over month. So to your point, do you know where your money is going? Is it at Target? Is it eating out? Is it at Starbucks? What does that look like? And I think as soon as you can kind of identify that, then you can figure out, okay, where can we move some things around to be more successful or to be
Right.
smarter long term. I also now, and this isn't for everybody, but I really believe in living below your means.
Mhm.
I think that our means are always going to be like expanding, right? We're always going to want bigger, better. So, how can we
Right.
live below? And so, can I afford rent at X amount of money a month? Yeah, I could probably afford that. How can I find something below that? How can I
Right.
find,
Well,
you know,
yeah, my daughters and her husband they live in a really nice apartment in downtown Dallas, and it's gorgeous. And they're looking at buying a nice older mid-century modern home in Fort Worth.
yeah,
And when it's all said and done, they're going to be paying $1,000 a month less on their mortgage than on their rent.
it's a big
And
deal.
actually have an investment in something. So
Yep,
it's
that's a big
great.
deal. And then what can you do with that $1,000? Can you put it into, some sort of IRA or put it
Hmm.
into like the market or, a savings account or what can you do with that, savings that's going to help you long term? So,
Right.
yeah, I agree. I know we're running a little bit over on time, so my final question for you
Oh,
is
yeah, sure.
for the younger generation, and I know you've already given a lot of wisdom, but what words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I think that it's boundaries and balance. That's
Mm,
the biggest two takeaways I would say, because you got to find balance in your life. Keep your friends outside of police work, or foster that. And you got to have boundaries. I mean, you have a career and you want to give it 110% every day you're at work, but it's time to go home too. And you have to have some boundaries. I mean, like I'll get a text sometimes at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and I'll look at it, I go, they can call me if it's that important.
mm,
I don't, I'm trying to be home. And if it's, you can put in the email, and my phone's always on, but I think you need to have some boundaries there so you can have um, um, downtime to decompress and think about other things, not just your career. So
yeah,
more think about your life.
I love it. Boundaries and balance.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for your time. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on here. I feel like we could have talked for like 3 hours.
Yeah,
So
the
thank
45 minutes
you.
went quick. I thought the time's up already. It's like,
I
wow.
know, I know. But thank you so much for your time. I really
Yes,
appreciate it. And, thank you for all you do.
my pleasure. Thanks.